So it's difficult. It's very different to look at what's happened in the former GDR, or what the situation is like that today. Because if you, for example, look at the new Romanian cinema, which I consider is one of the best in Europe currently, you can actually see that there is a different texture to the composition between streets and the buildings, the infrastructure. You have a kind of a patchwork between the buildings from the aristocracy of the early 20s of the 20th century, then the buildings and the infrastructure that was built during the time of communism, and then what came afterwards during times of neoliberalism. And I think that this is also how movies have to tell the stories of the world of today. And in Barbara, we somehow used this kind of approach as an orientation aid, because in the former east of Germany, the situation is quite comparable, because you have, for example, the villas, huge houses and estates from the 20s that were once splendid and are now not quite ruins, but have been run down quite in the years in between. And then you have those ready-made, prefabricated concrete blocks where people were living, and this is where the people have to move through and where they have to find their identity. I've never worked quite so much with the different techniques of shots and, what is it, counter shots?
Counter shots, counter shots.
And so different perspectives and looking at the same scene, if I understood you right. And my friend Harun Farouki, for example, he in the 90s worked in Romania, and he was following the demise of the Ceausescu regime during that time. And back then everyone was thinking that you could find cameras in every wall and listening devices, and that there were torturing installations in every cellar and every basement in the country, and just as you would find it in Orwell, in Orwell's novels. But apparently afterwards it became clear that the system was based on fear, and the fear that was living in the minds and in the heads of the people. And so in Barbara we decided not to try and show anything like surveillance cameras or microphones, listening devices, or the kind of technology that the Stasi may have been using, but rather the fact that this kind of politics of fear had entered into the minds of people, and that people in this atmosphere of fear and mistrust have to somehow live and also feel and have developed their emotions in that kind of context.
Wie sie versuchen, etwas von sich fernzuhalten, zu widerstehen. Das ist nicht nur ein Widerstand gegen das System, es ist auch ein Widerstand gegen sich selbst.
Long answers. I'm sorry. Yeah. I hear the noise. I heard the noise of his pen. My God, what have I done?
So, quite frequently, when you actually make a decision, quite in general, as for example, to leave your parents or to leave the house of your parents, then you may be looking forward to packing your bags. And if you say that, okay, on Monday I'll be moving out and I'm going to go to Berlin, then during the last 3 days you catch yourself not only feeling the kind of anticipation, joyful anticipation, because you know that you're leaving, but you become not only sentimental, but sometimes even almost depressive, because you start asking yourself whether you are leaving something behind that you have not really fully come to a close with, that you have not managed to really, reach a stage of closure and to bring it to an end, really. And then you start asking yourself, am I running away from it? And so that was also the situation with Barbara. She is also trying to leave a system behind, a political system within which she was living and that she had her dreams for. And so she's saying goodbye to socialism at the same time. And during those last weeks, she develops a kind of a doubt. And in general, if you want to be a maker, a doer, if you want to get something achieved, you can't afford to have any doubts, like many politicians, for example. And so what she's developing is a kind of armor that wouldn't let anything out or anything in. And but then there is this man, the doctor, who's also living as if in exile there, and he opens up to her, and that confuses her. And I myself personally like watching actors when they work, as they are trying to fend off things and you keep a distance to certain things, and at the same time, that's what I like to watch, how they do that. So all the male members of the production team, including myself and my friend Harun Farouki and the cameraman, for example, they thought that this single phrase was somewhat superfluous. That the fact that he said that you can sleep in and you can sleep as long as you want to, and there is enough money, I'm making enough money, but all the women of the team, no matter whether they were from the former East or from the West of Germany, they felt a cold shiver running down their spines because of the male power that was implied in that phrase. And because behind that gesture, there was the implied message that she would be turned into a housewife, and that's why I consider this phrase to be one of the most important phrases of the whole movie. And Nina Hoss, she actually managed to somehow make explicit that she feels this cold chill, but she doesn't act it out. And you only get to realize that she's uncomfortable with that phrase during the next couple of minutes. And this is actually also what becomes apparent, that this perspective of going to the West, that there is a cold wind blowing in her face from the West, and that's what she feels. So I say that you're right, but there are two things. There's, for example, this young girl, this young lady in the hotel who's with her in the hotel. She's something of a prostitute, or at least a half prostitute, and by realizing that, she also realizes that she herself is more or less being treated, or sees herself somewhat as a prostitute too, but she is willing to sell herself for money, for freedom, for the opportunity to go to Western Germany, and that the man who is connected to her in that context is not exactly behaving like the typical John who would approach a prostitute, but who still loves to say phrases like, "I'll get you out of here," the typical phrase that men use when talking to prostitutes, for example. But that fact that they use the phrase only points to the men loving themselves and not loving the women. And so this is also what she realizes, and it also becomes apparent in the fact that, for example, the only time that money pops up during the movie or plays a role during the movie is always Western money, and you get to see the catalogue and the materialistic side of things. And so she goes for the hard way and takes the tough decision to send the girl and to herself stay there, making a sacrifice, but at the same time not only feeling like a victim, because she feels that there are still, in spite of the fact that the country is going down fast, that there are still things that are being created and that are coming to life there, and that she would not want to leave those behind. And in that spirit, in that sense, she is a true revolutionary, yes. So I believe that when things are about to actually go down or disappear forever, that for the very last time they show all their beauty again, just as, for example, when you go to a flea market and you see things that had been considered to be trash before, that they actually look at you and show all their beauty in a last attempt. And that is also, for Barbara it's the same. The Eastern Germany that is about to actually disappear, and that's already going down, and that she's trying to also to escape, that in that very special, exceptional circumstance that she finds herself in this exile-like situation, that again she gets to see the beauty and the special side of things. And so you don't get to see, Berlin from the bird's eye view, and that may not have been possible, but in that very moment it was. And I got that feeling from a novel written by a writer called Breuning, and the German title is Rummelplatz, which roughly translates as a fun fair. And this was a book about the beginning of the German Democratic Republic, where anti-fascists and farmers and workers tried to create a new and beautiful country, and of course they failed miserably, but in the beginning there was this feeling of creating something beautiful, and this is being reflected in those last moments of the system.